The mysterious visitor. It was a quiet night in the small town of Westfield. Dr. Emily Foster, a scientist who specialized in human biology, was working late in her lab. The clock ticked slowly as she hunched over her desk, scribbling notes. She was used to these late nights, the hum of the lab equipment filling the air. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. Emily was so focused on her work that she barely noticed the strange lights outside the window at first. A sudden flash of light caught her attention. She looked up, startled. The light wasn't from a car or a street lamp. It was far brighter and moving in a way that made no sense. The light grew stronger, until it was impossible to ignore. It hovered just outside the lab, casting a strange glow through the window. Emily's heart began to race. She rushed to the window, her pulse quickening. What she saw made her freeze. A spaceship. It was unlike anything she had ever seen in the books or movies she'd studied. The ship wasn't large, but it was shaped like nothing on Earth, smooth and metallic, with glowing lines running along its surface. It hovered silently, as if defying gravity. Emily couldn't believe her eyes. Was this some kind of government test? Or was it something far stranger? She stood in awe for a few moments, unsure of what to do. The ship remained hovering outside the lab, as if waiting for her. Emily's mind raced with questions. What was this? Who was inside? And why had it come to her, of all places? Before she could think of a plan, the ship began to lower, slowly and carefully, landing in the clearing just behind her lab. The lights dimmed, and the ship became still. The silence that followed was almost deafening. With a deep breath, Emily decided to investigate. She grabbed her jacket and rushed out of the building, her thoughts racing. The night air was chilly, and her footsteps echoed as she walked towards the landing site. Her lab was far from the town, so there was no one else around to witness this strange event. As she reached the edge of the clearing, she saw the ship more clearly now. It wasn't like anything she had ever imagined. The surface shimmered, almost as if it were alive. Then, the hatch at the bottom of the ship opened, slowly, with a soft hiss. A figure emerged, standing tall in the dim light. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The figure was not human. It had a humanoid shape, but its features were different, strange. The being had long, slender limbs, its skin a soft shade of blue, and its eyes glowed a faint, eerie green. It wore a simple, metallic suit that seemed to shimmer as it moved. The alien did not speak at first. It simply stood there, watching her. Emily couldn't move. She was both terrified and fascinated. This was the moment she had dreamed of for years, but she had never imagined it would happen like this. Finally, the alien spoke in a voice that was calm and smooth, yet somehow distant. "Human," it said. "I come in peace." Emily blinked, still unable to fully process what she was hearing. This was real. She wasn't dreaming. "I am Zorith," the alien continued, its voice almost hypnotic. "I have traveled across the stars to learn about your species. There is much we do not understand, and we need your help." Emily took a step back, her mind racing. This wasn't a prank. It wasn't a misunderstanding. This was an actual alien, standing right in front of her. She had so many questions, but one stood out above all the others. What did this alien want with her? Zorith seemed to sense her confusion. "I have come to learn about your methods of reproduction," it said, its voice matter-of-fact. "Our species is struggling. We cannot reproduce as we once did, and we believe your species has a method we could benefit from." Emily's heart pounded in her chest. Reproduction. Why was this alien asking her about something so personal, so human? She could barely wrap her mind around it. Was this some kind of test? Or was there something more sinister at play? The alien took another step forward, its eyes locked onto hers. "I mean no harm," Zorith said, "but I need your help to understand your ways. Your biology. Your methods." Emily swallowed hard. She was a scientist, trained to study the human body. But this was beyond anything she had ever imagined. Could she really help an alien understand human reproduction? Was that even possible? She thought about the potential dangers. If she agreed to help, who knew what could happen? What would the alien do with this knowledge? And if she refused, what would happen then? The alien was clearly powerful and could easily overpower her. She had no idea if it meant harm, but something deep inside told her that this was no ordinary situation. Zorath watched her closely, waiting for a response. Emily had no idea what to say. She was both frightened and curious. What kind of person would she be if she refused to help? And what kind of consequences would she face if she agreed? "I need time to think," Emily finally said, her voice shaky. Zorath nodded, its glowing eyes still fixed on her. "I will wait. But understand this. Time is something we do not have much of." The alien stepped back into the ship, and the hatch closed silently behind it. Emily stood alone in the clearing, her mind swirling with questions and fears. What had just happened? And what would she do now? The silence hung in the air as Emily took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. She had a decision to make. But one thing was certain. Her life was about to change forever. A dangerous request. The next few hours were a blur. Emily had returned to her lab, pacing back and forth, her mind spinning with the events that had just unfolded. She had 1,000 questions, questions that only Zorath could answer, but each question seemed more terrifying than the last. She had never imagined that her quiet life would lead her to face something so alien. She sat at her desk, her hands trembling as she replayed the words of the strange visitor in her mind. "I have come to learn about your methods of reproduction." She tried to push the thoughts aside, but they refused to leave her. What could an alien species possibly want with such a deeply human process? And why had it chosen her, a simple scientist, to help? She knew enough about alien biology from her studies, but human reproduction was a sensitive topic. It was private. It was personal. And yet, here she was, being asked to explain it to a being from another galaxy. As the minutes turned into hours, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Zorath seemed harmless, but what did it mean when it said, "We cannot reproduce as we once did"? Could there be more to this than it was letting on? Was this truly a peaceful mission, or was there something darker at play? Just as she was beginning to feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her, her phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. It was a private number, the kind she had never seen before. "Hello," she answered hesitantly, wondering if it was someone from the government or even someone from her past. But the voice on the other end was unmistakable. "This is Zorath," the alien said, his voice calm and measured, but there was an undertone of urgency. "I understand you need time, but we cannot afford to waste it. My species' survival depends on the knowledge you possess." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. She had hoped for more time, but now it seemed like the decision was being forced on her. She wasn't ready, but how could she refuse? The idea of letting an entire species fade away simply because of her fear was almost unbearable. I need more information," Emily replied, her voice shaking. "What exactly do you want from me?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Zorath answered, "We need to understand your reproductive biology in its entirety. The method, the processes, the conditions. Your species can reproduce with such ease, yet we have not been able to do so for centuries. My people are dying, Dr. Foster. We have lost our way." Emily's heart clenched at the mention of the alien species suffering. She could sense the desperation in Zorath's words, but she also couldn't ignore the part of her that was telling her this was a dangerous request. Could she really provide the answers this alien sought? And what if something went horribly wrong? Zorath continued, sensing her hesitation. "I understand your reluctance, but please, you must consider this. If we do not succeed in this endeavor, we will cease to exist. We are a dying race, and I have traveled across the stars to find a solution. Your planet holds the key to our survival." Emily was torn. She couldn't ignore the sincerity in Zoreth's voice, nor could she turn a blind eye to the desperation of an entire species. But was she ready to risk everything to give this alien the knowledge it sought? "Why me?" Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper. "There must be other scientists, other researchers. Why come to me?" Zoreth's answer was calm, but there was a hint of sadness. "I have spoken to many humans, but your work, Dr. Foster, it is unique. Your research into human biology, especially in relation to reproduction, has caught the attention of my people. We believe you are the one who can help us." Emily took a deep breath. She had always prided herself on her work, but this was something entirely different. She wasn't just helping to further human knowledge. She was being asked to save an alien species, to offer up the secrets of life itself. It was a burden that seemed too heavy to bear. "I don't know," Emily said softly, her voice filled with doubt. "I don't know if I can do this. It's too dangerous." Zoreth was silent for a moment, as if weighing her words carefully. Then he spoke again, his voice softer but still firm. "I understand your fear, Dr. Foster. But you must know this. Time is running out. If you refuse, we may never get another chance. We cannot risk waiting any longer." The words hit Emily like a punch to the stomach. She knew he was right. Time was a luxury she didn't have. If she didn't act now, the alien species might never have another chance to reproduce. The thought of condemning an entire civilization was unbearable. But even as she knew the right thing to do, doubt still gnawed at her. What would she be giving away? What would happen if Zoreth's people used the knowledge she provided for their own purposes? Would they be able to handle the power of human reproduction, or would it become something uncontrollable? The possibilities seemed endless and terrifying. "I'll help," Emily finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I need to understand more. I need to know exactly what you want and what you're planning to do with this knowledge." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Then Zoreth replied, "Of course. I will answer all your questions, Dr. Foster, but we must act quickly." Emily took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. This was it. There was no turning back now. She had made her choice. But even as she prepared to help the alien, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something much bigger than she had ever imagined. Something dangerous. Something that could change everything. As the call ended, Emily sat in her chair, her hands trembling slightly. She had agreed to help Zoreth, but the questions were only beginning. What had she just signed up for? And would she be able to control the consequences? Only time would tell. The agreement. The days that followed felt like a blur for Emily. Her life had been upended in the span of a single encounter. She had always been a scientist, obsessed with uncovering the secrets of the human body. But this was a test beyond anything she had ever faced. After her phone call with Zoreth, she spent several sleepless nights trying to make sense of the decision she had made. She had agreed to help the alien, but in doing so, she had opened a door that might never be closed. What if things went wrong? What if the knowledge she provided would be misused? But more than anything, she felt an intense pressure weighing on her shoulders. She was not just helping an alien. She was being asked to guide them through one of the most intimate processes of human existence. Could she truly teach them the secrets of human reproduction? The decision was final. Zoreth had made it clear that time was running out. His species needed answers, and she had agreed to provide them. Emily was prepared to begin the work, but she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something more was at play. She had so many unanswered questions, questions that Zoreth hadn't fully addressed. Her thoughts were interrupted one morning when Zoreth arrived at her lab. The spaceship, sleek and silent, hovered just outside the building, casting long shadows in the early morning light. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she watched the hatch open, and Zoreth emerged, his form now more familiar, yet still alien in every sense of the word. The tall, blue-skinned figure walked toward her with purposeful strides. His eyes glowed faintly, and his expression was a mixture of determination and curiosity. Emily had learned much about him over the last few days, but she still didn't understand everything. Who was he really? And why had his species come to Earth? "Dr. Foster," Zoreth said, his voice as smooth as always, though she noticed a hint of urgency in his tone. "Are you ready to begin?" Emily nodded, trying to steady her racing heart. "I am. But before we start, I need you to understand something." She paused, her words heavy with the weight of her decision. "This process, it's not just about biology. It's about the human experience. Reproduction is tied to emotion, to connection, to love. You must understand that before we proceed, you cannot simply replicate it." Zoreth listened carefully, his eyes narrowing as he processed her words. "I understand. It is not just the biological act I seek to understand. I know there is something deeper, something beyond physical reproduction. We are prepared to learn, Dr. Foster. My people are ready." Emily took a deep breath. She had to believe that Zoreth's intentions were pure. After all, his species was on the brink of extinction. What choice did she have? She had made a promise, and now it was time to deliver. "All right," Emily said, her voice firm. "Let's begin. But I will not give you all the answers at once. You must learn each step, feel each part of the process as a human would. It's not just science. It's part of what makes us who we are." Zoreth nodded solemnly. "We will follow your lead, Dr. Foster. Show us the way." The first step of the process involved studying human biology in depth. Emily led Zoreth through the intricacies of the human reproductive system, every organ, every hormone, and every physical reaction. She explained the roles of male and female biology, the cycle of ovulation, and the release of sperm. As she spoke, Zoreth observed closely, taking in every word with intense focus. "What you are describing," Zoreth said quietly, his voice tinged with awe, "is incredibly complex. We have never understood this level of detail. But there is something about it, something beautiful. It is as though life itself is a delicate dance." Emily nodded, impressed by Zoreth's understanding. He wasn't just learning. He was truly contemplating what she was teaching him. "Yes," she said softly, "human reproduction is a miracle. It's a process that happens every day. But it's not something that should be taken lightly. It's more than biology. It's about creating life, about the potential of new beginnings." Zoreth's eyes glowed a little brighter, as if a new understanding was beginning to form. "I see now. This connection. It is what we have been missing. It is what we have failed to understand." Emily felt a strange sense of relief. Perhaps this wasn't as dangerous as she feared. Perhaps Zoreth and his people were truly ready to understand the importance of what they were asking. They weren't just seeking a cold scientific answer. They were searching for the emotional depth that came with human reproduction. But how far were they willing to go? The next phase of the experiment took them deeper into the realm of human emotion. Zoreth's species had never fully understood the concept of love, or the emotions that governed relationships between humans. Emily had to teach him about attraction, connection, and the intimacy that came with reproduction. "Love is not just a feeling," she explained as they sat together in her lab. "It is a bond. It's a connection between two people that makes reproduction meaningful. It's what allows us to bring new life into the world. Without love, there is no true understanding of the process." Zoreth seemed to struggle with the concept. "But how does one know love? How does one feel it?" he asked, his voice soft with curiosity. Emily paused, trying to find the right words. "Love is not something you can see or touch. It's something you feel deep inside. It's trust, affection, and the willingness to share your life with someone else. You don't have to understand it completely, but you have to be open to it." Zoreth's eyes flickered with emotion, though Emily wasn't sure if he fully grasped the depth of what she was saying. "I will try," he said. "I will do my best to understand." As the days passed, Emily continued her lessons, explaining the human experience of reproduction as best she could. But she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they were venturing into dangerous territory. Love and intimacy were fragile things. Could Zoreth's species truly understand them without corrupting them? Could they replicate what it meant to be human, to be connected in such a deep and personal way? Emily didn't have the answers, but she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer just a teacher of biology. She was a guide, leading an alien species through the most fundamental part of what it meant to be human. And as the pressure built, she began to wonder if she was losing control of the situation. She had given them the knowledge they sought, but now she had to ask herself, what would Zoreth and his people do with it? The unforeseen consequences. The days that followed seemed to blur into each other for Emily. As the lessons progressed, she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease growing deeper within her. She had agreed to help Zoreth and his species, but now that the knowledge had been shared, the consequences of that decision were beginning to feel more real and more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Zoreth had absorbed the information she provided him with astonishing speed. At times, Emily was taken aback by how quickly he grasped complex human concepts. His intelligence was beyond anything she had ever encountered. But it was not just his intellect that was growing. There were subtle, unsettling changes happening within him, changes that were harder to ignore. At first, it was little things. Zoreth's voice, usually so calm and measured, had begun to fluctuate with more human-like emotion. His movements had become less mechanical, more fluid, as though he were starting to imitate human behavior. Emily noticed the way his eyes lingered a little longer than necessary when he looked at her, how his posture had become more relaxed around her. His presence was beginning to feel unsettling. She had always thought of him as an alien, something separate from herself and her world, but now he seemed to be becoming more like her. "Dr. Foster," Zoreth said one day, his voice softer than usual as he sat across from her at her desk. "I've been thinking. You have explained how love connects people, how it binds them in ways that are beyond biology. But I find myself questioning something. Is it possible for someone like me, to truly understand love, to feel it as you do?" The question hung in the air like a weight. Emily's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't what she had anticipated. She had expected him to focus on the scientific aspects, to study reproduction from a purely biological perspective. But this was personal. This was emotional. I don't know," Emily replied cautiously, her eyes searching his face. "Love is complicated. It's not something you can just study or replicate. It's something that grows over time, something that develops when two people connect deeply. It's about shared experiences, trust, and vulnerability." Zoreth's eyes seemed to shimmer with a strange intensity, almost like he was trying to understand something fundamental about himself. "But what if I wanted to understand it? What if I wanted to experience it?" he asked. His voice was quiet, almost unsure, as if the question itself was foreign to him. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. There was something deeply unsettling about the way Zoreth spoke, something in the way he was starting to resemble the humans he had once viewed with cold detachment. Was he truly capable of love? Or was this some form of imitation, a mimicry of human behavior that was growing too close for comfort? She pushed the thought aside, telling herself that Zoreth's species was simply trying to understand something they had never known. After all, their survival depended on it. But the more Emily thought about it, the more she realized how dangerous this situation was becoming. Zoreth wasn't just learning about human reproduction. He was beginning to experience human emotions, and with that came a new, unexpected danger. That evening, as they continued their research, something unusual happened. Zoreth seemed more agitated. His movements were jerky, almost erratic. He paced back and forth in the lab, his glowing eyes flickering with confusion and frustration. "I don't understand," he muttered to himself. "I've been learning, I've been trying to understand. But it's still not enough. There's something missing. Why is it so difficult to understand the concept of love? Why does it hurt? Emily watched in disbelief as Zorath gripped the edge of the desk, his body trembling slightly. She had never seen him like this before. He had always been so composed, so calm. But now, there was something raw and vulnerable about him. He was struggling with emotions he didn't know how to handle, emotions he hadn't been prepared for. "Zorath," Emily said gently, her voice laced with concern. "What's happening to you?" Zorath's head snapped up, his eyes wide. "I can feel it," he said, his voice strained. "The connection, the bond you spoke of. But it's not just a feeling. It's overwhelming. It's like an urge, like a need that I can't control. It's too much. I don't know what to do with it." Emily's heart raced. This was far beyond what she had anticipated. She had warned him about the emotional complexities of human reproduction, but she hadn't realized the full extent of what it would mean for him to experience those emotions firsthand. Zorath wasn't just learning about love. He was feeling it, and the intensity of it was clearly affecting him in ways he couldn't comprehend. "Zorath, listen to me," Emily said, trying to keep her voice calm. "You're not human. You don't understand the full weight of what you're feeling right now. This urge you're describing, love, attraction, all of it, it's complicated. It's not something you can just force. It requires patience, trust, and time." But Zorath was beyond reasoning. His expression twisted with frustration, his body language becoming more erratic. "You don't understand," he shouted, his voice filled with a strange kind of pain. "I need to understand. I need to feel it the way you do. I want to feel what it's like to be human." The desperation in his voice was unlike anything Emily had ever heard. She knew, deep down, that things were spiraling out of control. She had only wanted to help him, to teach him. But now she realized that what she had started had consequences she couldn't predict. She had shown him the depths of human connection, but she hadn't prepared him for the emotional storm that came with it. Suddenly, Zorath's body began to shimmer, his form warping in a way that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. Emily took a step back, her eyes wide in shock. It was as if his very being was reacting to the emotions coursing through him. His body was shifting, adapting to the emotional turmoil he was experiencing. The process of human reproduction, the connection that came with it, was more powerful than she had ever imagined. "Zorath, stop," Emily pleaded, her voice shaking with fear. "You need to control yourself. You're not ready for this." But Zorath's transformation only intensified. His eyes glowed brighter, and his form seemed to grow taller, more imposing. He was changing, not just physically but emotionally, and the more he experienced, the more uncontrollable the transformation became. Emily realized with a sickening sense of dread that she had underestimated the power of human emotions. What she had thought would be a simple transfer of knowledge had turned into something much darker, something that she couldn't control. As Zorath continued to change, Emily was faced with an impossible choice. How could she stop him? How could she undo what had been set in motion? The danger was real, and she knew that unless she found a way to help him regain control, everything, human and alien alike, was at risk. A shift in power. The days that followed Zorath's transformation were the most challenging Emily had ever faced. The alien, no, the being in front of her, was no longer the calm, logical creature she had once known. He was something different, something more unpredictable, more dangerous. His emotions, once foreign and almost non-existent, had overtaken him. Love, desire, need. These powerful forces had completely overwhelmed him. His body had changed, shifting in both physical and emotional ways, and Emily wasn't sure who or what he had become. She had never imagined that helping an alien species might lead to a situation like this. As a scientist, she had always dealt with facts and reason. But emotions weren't something she could measure with a microscope or quantify in a lab report. They were chaotic, uncontrollable forces that seemed to have no rules or boundaries. And now, Zoreth was a living example of that chaos. Emily had spent days in the lab, trying to find a solution. She had tried to reach him, to remind him of the purpose of his mission, to learn, to understand. But it seemed as though the more she tried to guide him, the further he drifted away. Every time she attempted to speak to him about control or the limits of human emotion, his behavior became more erratic. He no longer responded to her like a student seeking knowledge. Instead, he looked at her with a gaze that was both intense and unnerving. The admiration in his eyes had shifted to something else, something much darker. "You don't understand, Dr. Foster," Zoreth said one evening, his voice low and almost pleading. "I don't need to understand how you love anymore. I need to feel it. I need to be a part of it. I need you." The words sent a chill down her spine. She had never been afraid of Zoreth before, but now, standing in front of him, she felt vulnerable. His voice wasn't the calm, measured tone she had once known. It was raw, filled with desperation. His alien features, once so foreign, now seemed almost human, as if he were starting to blur the line between the two species. The once collected Zoreth was slipping away, and in his place was something far more dangerous. A being who was beginning to act on his emotions with no understanding of the consequences. "You're not ready for this," Emily said firmly, her voice trembling despite her attempts to remain strong. "You can't just force these feelings. It doesn't work that way. Love, it takes time, it takes patience. It's not something you can just feel or take." Zoreth's expression darkened, and for the first time, she saw something akin to anger in his eyes. "You speak of time, of patience," he growled. "But my people don't have time, Dr. Foster. We are dying. My species is dying. And yet you ask me to wait, to learn more before I can experience what it means to live." Emily's heart clenched. She understood his desperation. She understood that Zoreth's people had been on the brink of extinction for centuries, that they had come to Earth in search of a solution to their reproductive crisis. She understood the urgency, but what Zoreth was asking for, what he was becoming, was something far more dangerous than anything she had anticipated. His transformation wasn't just physical. It was emotional, psychological. He was no longer just seeking knowledge. He was now driven by something deeper, something primal. And Emily realized that she was in uncharted territory. She had no idea how to help him. She had no idea how to control the growing storm within him. "I've given you everything I can," Emily said, her voice softer now, filled with concern. "I've taught you what I can about human reproduction, but you have to understand, you cannot take control of someone else's emotions. They don't belong to you." Zoreth didn't respond at first. Instead, he turned away, walking to the window of the lab and gazing out into the night. The glow from his eyes reflected in the glass, a constant reminder of the changes that were happening inside him. Emily watched him closely, her mind racing. What had she created? What had she unleashed? "I don't understand," Zoreth finally whispered, almost to himself. "I've learned so much, but none of it feels real. It's as if I'm not a part of it. I'm an outsider, forever outside of the thing I want the most." The sadness in his voice struck a chord deep within Emily. Despite the chaos, despite the danger, she couldn't deny the truth. Zoreth was struggling. He wasn't simply trying to imitate humanity. He was trying to understand what it meant to be human. But the more he delved into these emotions, the more he lost himself in them. And the more he tried to make sense of it all, the more his desire to be part of something human, consumed him. "Zoreth, you can't just become human," Emily said gently. "You can't force yourself into a life that isn't yours. What you're feeling is natural for you, but it's also dangerous. You're trying to live a life that's not your own. And in doing so, you're losing the very thing that makes you, you." Zoreth turned toward her, his eyes blazing with emotion. "I want to understand, Dr. Foster. I want to live. I want to be a part of something real, something that means something." The words hit Emily harder than she expected. For a moment, she saw him not as an alien, not as a creature from another world, but as something more, a being who, in his own way, was desperately searching for meaning in the chaos of his existence. She felt sympathy for him, more than she had ever thought possible. But she also knew that what he was doing, what he was becoming, was dangerous, for him, and for everyone involved. "I don't know how to help you," she admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "But I can't let you destroy yourself. You have to understand that emotions, love, desire, they're not something you can just take. They have to be earned. They have to be shared. And right now, you're trying to force something that isn't yours to control." Zorath was silent for a long moment. His gaze softened, and for a brief instant, Emily thought he might finally understand. But the moment passed. Instead, he stepped closer to her, his presence overwhelming. His body was still shifting, his form flickering in the dim light, almost as if he were trying to find his true shape, his true self. "I don't want to lose myself," he said quietly, "but I can't stop what I'm feeling. And I can't stop needing you." The last words were a whisper, filled with a longing that struck at Emily's core. She had spent so long trying to keep things professional, to keep a distance between them. But now, standing in front of her, Zorath wasn't just an alien. He was something more. Something that had crossed the boundary between species, between the logic of science and the chaos of human emotion. Emily stepped back, her heart pounding. "I can't be what you want me to be," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I can't give you what you need. I'm not the answer you're looking for." Zorath's eyes flickered with something dark, an emotion that Emily couldn't quite place. Anger? Frustration? Or was it something deeper? Whatever it was clear that Zorath was changing in ways that she couldn't control, and the more he changed, the more his power over her, and over everything, grew. The alien had come seeking knowledge, but now, in his search for understanding, he had uncovered something far more dangerous. The power to transform not just his species, but himself, and everything around him. Emily realized, with a sinking feeling, that she was no longer guiding Zorath through a simple scientific experiment. She was part of something far bigger now, something that was slipping out of her control, and she wasn't sure whether it was even possible to stop it. The final test. The tension in the lab had reached a breaking point. Emily felt it in every fiber of her being. The once quiet and controlled space was now charged with an electric sense of urgency and fear. Zorath had changed, and she no longer recognized the alien before her as the calm, inquisitive being who had arrived at her doorstep seeking knowledge. He was someone, something new, something far more human than she could have ever predicted. But at what cost? The days following their conversation had been unsettling. Zorath seemed to withdraw into himself at times, almost as if he were retreating to some internal place where he could work through his emotions. But at other times, he was more intense, more focused on the lessons she had taught him. It was clear he was still trying to reconcile the vast, complicated web of human emotions he was experiencing. It wasn't just about reproduction anymore. It was about connection, identity, and the overwhelming need to belong. "I don't understand, Dr. Foster," he had said to her just a day ago. "I know what love is. I know what it means to want, but I can't seem to control it. It consumes me." Emily had tried to explain it again. Love was not something you could control. It had to come naturally, without force or pressure. But Zorath couldn't understand that. He had been taught to act logically, to dissect everything, to reduce everything to its parts and functions. But love and connection were not equations to solve. They were wild forces that defied structure and reason. Yet, despite the warning signs, Emily found herself unable to walk away. Zorath needed her help more than ever now, and the reality of the situation was impossible to ignore. His species was running out of time, and the stakes had never been higher. The knowledge she had provided him had opened a door he couldn't close, a door that had led him into an emotional abyss he wasn't prepared to face. And now, there was only one thing left to do: the final test. The plan was simple, too simple. Zorath had asked her to guide him through the most intimate aspect of human reproduction, to see if it would trigger the final step in his species' reproduction process. He believed that by performing the act, by creating the biological connection, it would give him and his species the ability to reproduce once more. But what he didn't understand was that it wasn't just biology that mattered, it was everything else. Emily had spent hours, days even, agonizing over what this meant. Could she really go through with it? Could she lead Zorath through the process, knowing full well that her own emotions might be at risk, knowing that the emotional chaos he had unleashed in himself might spill over? She had already warned him about the dangers, but now, standing at the precipice, it seemed there was no other choice. Zorath had grown insistent. "Dr. Foster, we are at the end of the line," he had said, his voice low and full of desperation. "I need to understand. My people need this. I need this. I must see it for myself, feel it for myself. If we do not take this step now, there may be no hope." Emily had agreed, but only under one condition. She needed to maintain control over the situation. She needed to ensure that they were not rushing into something that would do more harm than good. Her role was no longer just to teach Zorath about biology. It was to ensure that whatever they did, it was done with careful consideration. She was scared, more scared than she had ever been. But she had no choice. The alien species depended on her. Zorath depended on her. Tonight, they would perform the final test. The lab had been prepared meticulously. Emily had gone over every detail, checking and rechecking the equipment. The conditions had to be just right. Perfect temperature, perfect atmosphere. She didn't trust herself to be in this situation, but she trusted the science. She could control the variables, at least in the physical sense. What happened after that, however, was entirely out of her hands. Zorath stood across the room from her, his form still shifting at times, though the intensity in his eyes had mellowed. He had not spoken in what felt like hours, his gaze fixed on the floor. Emily could see the internal struggle on his face, the battle between the human emotions he had begun to feel and the cold, logical being he had been trained to be. "Dr. Foster," Zorath said quietly, almost to himself, "I don't know if I can do this. I have been taught to control, to master my body and mind, but I cannot control this need. It is not just physical. It is everything." Emily swallowed hard. The words felt like a weight in her chest. "Zorath, this is not something to control. It's something to experience. And you can't force it. It has to happen naturally, or it won't work." Zorath met her eyes, his expression softened. "I don't know if I can wait, Emily. I need to feel it. I need to understand what it means to be alive." The room felt smaller as the air between them thickened with emotion. Emily knew what she had to do, but that didn't make it any easier. This was the final test. She had warned Zorath of the dangers, but she also understood that without taking this step, there would be no turning back for his species. He would remain lost, forever searching for a part of himself that he could never fully understand. "Let's begin," Emily said softly, taking a step toward him. As they stood face to face, the quiet between them felt like the calm before a storm. Zorath reached out, his hand trembling slightly as it brushed against her arm. His skin was smooth and cool, but there was something else, a pulse of energy beneath the surface. He was no longer the alien who had arrived at her doorstep, but a being who had been fundamentally altered by his desire to connect, to understand. Emily took a deep breath, her heart pounding. She reached up, gently taking his hand in hers. The room seemed to vibrate with the electricity of the moment, and she couldn't tell if it was the tension of the act they were about to perform or the emotions that had been building between them for so long. The line between teacher and student, human and alien, had long since been blurred. And now, there was no going back. "Remember what I told you," Emily said, her voice shaky. This is not just a test. It is something that can change everything. You must let go of control. Zoreth's eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, everything else faded away. The tension, the fear, the uncertainty, it all disappeared, leaving only the two of them in that moment. He nodded silently, as if understanding the gravity of the decision he had made, the decision that would either save or destroy his species. And then they began. The act was not what either of them had imagined. It wasn't smooth or effortless. There were moments of hesitation, moments of doubt. Zoreth's emotions, raw, unfiltered, flared in ways that made him almost pull away. But Emily held him close, reminding him that this wasn't something that could be forced. It had to be real. It had to be genuine. The final test was not just about human reproduction. It was about understanding, connection, and vulnerability. As the process unfolded, Emily felt the weight of it all pressing down on her. She had never imagined that the scientific world she had built for herself would lead her to this point, to a place where love, emotions, and biology collided in such an intimate and overwhelming way. When it was over, neither of them spoke. The room was eerily quiet, filled only with the sound of their breathing. Emily's mind was spinning. She had done it. She had guided Zoreth through the final step. But what now? What had they created? Would this moment be enough to bring his species back from the brink? Or would it be a moment that would spiral out of control, leading them down a path they couldn't return from? She didn't have the answers, but she knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning of something much larger than either of them could comprehend. The unexpected outcome. The silence in the lab was overwhelming. Emily stood there, feeling the weight of what had just happened pressing down on her chest. She didn't know what to expect, but she certainly hadn't anticipated this stillness, this pause. The act had ended, but the world around her felt like it was holding its breath, as if it were waiting for something. Zoreth, now standing a few feet away, was eerily calm. But she could see the flicker in his eyes. The storm of emotions he had been struggling with seemed momentarily subdued, but not gone. For a long moment, neither spoke. The air felt thick with unspoken questions, with uncertainty. What had just happened? Had the test succeeded? Had it triggered the reproductive process Zoreth's species had been so desperate to understand? Or was this another step in a much larger experiment they couldn't even begin to comprehend? Finally, Zoreth broke the silence. His voice was soft, almost hesitant, but there was something new in it, something profound. "I feel something," he said slowly, "but it's not what I expected. It's not a physical reaction. It's—" He paused, searching for the right words. "It's as if I have unlocked something within myself that I didn't know existed. Oh, understanding. A connection that is beyond anything biological." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had suspected this, but hearing him say it was something entirely different. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as though afraid to shatter the fragile moment they were sharing. Zoreth met her gaze, his eyes glowing with a softness that wasn't there before. "I thought I came here to learn about reproduction, to unlock the secret of your species' ability to create life. But it's more than that. I understand now that what I sought wasn't just the mechanics of biology. It was something far deeper. I understand connection. I understand love." Emily stood still, her mind racing. Could it be true? Could Zoreth have actually experienced what it meant to be human? Had their interaction, their shared moment, actually bridged the gap between their species in a way she had never imagined possible? She had always believed that the emotional aspects of reproduction were an intrinsic part of being human, something beyond the reach of the mind, of intellect. But Zoreth was not just any creature. He was a being who had crossed the boundaries of logic and emotion, of science and feeling. And somehow, he was beginning to understand what it meant to truly be alive. "I never thought I would understand it like this," Zoreth continued, his voice barely audible, almost as though he were talking to himself. I thought reproduction was the key. But it was never just about creating life. It was about the bond between two beings, the connection that transcends biology. It is about the trust, the vulnerability, the willingness to share yourself with another. This is what I have been searching for. This is the key. Emily felt her heart tighten. She had warned him, warned herself, that emotions like these could never be forced. She had tried to keep a distance between them, to protect both herself and him from the overwhelming tide of feelings that surged between them. But now, in this moment, it was clear. Zorith had not just gained knowledge. He had gained something far more precious, a true understanding of human connection. But you don't understand, Zorith, Emily said softly, her voice trembling as she tried to grasp the gravity of what was happening. You're not human. You can't experience love the same way we do. There are parts of it, the pain, the heartbreak, the sacrifice, that you can't just take and use. It's not something that can be learned through intellect alone. It has to be felt, in your soul. And right now, you're not ready. Zoreth's eyes softened, and for the first time, Emily saw the flicker of something vulnerable in him. I never intended to become human, Dr. Foster, he said quietly. I never sought to replace your species. I only wanted to understand. But in doing so, I have discovered something even more important, something I can never ignore. Emily took a step back, her mind reeling. What was he saying? Was this an epiphany, a moment of clarity in the storm of emotion he had experienced? Or was it a deeper realization of the consequences of what they had done? She didn't know if she could handle the weight of it. She didn't know if she could live with the knowledge that the alien species she had helped could now be driven by these newfound feelings. I thought I could give you answers, Emily said, her voice choked with emotion. I thought if I helped you, helped your species, I would be solving a problem. But now I don't know if I've created something even worse. You've opened a door, Zorith. A door that can't be closed. Zorith looked at her, his gaze steady. Perhaps, Dr. Foster, some doors are not meant to be closed. Perhaps the answers you think you've given me are not the answers I truly needed. I have seen what your species can offer. I have seen the depth of your emotions, your connections. And now I understand that this is something my people need, something they have forgotten. Emily's heart sank. She realized that Zorith wasn't just talking about the mechanics of reproduction anymore. He was talking about the very essence of humanity, about love, connection, and all the messy, painful, beautiful parts of life that made being human so unique. And in understanding this, he had transformed in a way she had never expected. I'm not human, Dr. Foster, Zorith said softly, his voice filled with an unexpected tenderness. But I have seen your humanity. And now I carry it with me. I cannot undo what has been done. But I can choose how I will carry this knowledge forward. A wave of emotion hit Emily, a rush of realization that both frightened and humbled her. Zorith's people had come to Earth seeking knowledge, seeking a way to save their species. But in the process, they had uncovered something far greater. They had discovered the essence of human connection, and in doing so, they had learned that survival was not just about reproduction. It was about understanding and sharing that very connection. As the moments passed, the weight of the situation settled heavily on Emily's shoulders. Zorith's people might have found a way to reproduce, but they had also discovered something more profound. The potential for love, the power of human experience, and the beauty that came with it. It wasn't just about physical survival anymore. It was about emotional survival. Zorith had come to Earth for an answer to a biological problem. But in the end, he had discovered something that would change both their worlds forever. As Zorith turned to leave, his form glowing softly in the dim light of the lab, he paused. Thank you, Dr. Foster, he said quietly, his voice thick with meaning. You have given me more than I ever expected. And now my people will learn not just how to survive, but how to live. Emily watched as Zorith stepped toward the door, her mind racing, her heart torn. She had given him the knowledge he sought. She had guided him through a process that had changed both of them, but she wasn't sure if either of them could ever fully comprehend the consequences of their actions. But as the door to the lab closed behind him, she understood one thing with clarity. Sometimes the answers we seek are not the ones we expect. And sometimes the greatest discoveries are not about science, but about understanding the connections that make us all human. The world outside was still, but Emily knew that what had just happened in her lab would echo far beyond this moment, into the future of an alien species, and perhaps into the future of humanity itself. And though she couldn't predict what would come next, she knew that it would be a future shaped by a new understanding of love, connection, and what it truly meant to be alive.